welcome to the 2024 Macbeth Symposium. Thank you all for being here. I know you've got yours. We are hoping that this afternoon is going to be inspirational and really get you thinking about Macbeth in lots of different ways. So we're going to have a series of talks to start with. You are going to need some thinking during these talks. So you practiced this last week. How would you summarise the talk? What are the key points? What is the most significant point and a point that needs development, so that evaluative response to the talk. And then maybe something that you would like to know more about or something you may disagree with. So, without further ado, I welcome Mr. Muir to talk about time and music.
Thank you, Mr. Darcy. Time is something we are all aware of and not aware of at certain times. It's, I think, been seen for centuries as quite a slippery concept. We sometimes feel like time is flying. We sometimes feel like time is going too slowly, perhaps already feeling that. Of course, time itself doesn't really change, but our perception of it is massively variable. And in this relationship with time is something I think is a key aspect of that, one that's often overlooked. As a quick test of its significance, I thought I'd just look at a bit of data, because data can be quite an interesting way to look at literature sometimes. Just look at the vocabulary, so a little bit of keyword finding. There are 17,121 words in Macbeth, which may sound like a lot, but if actually you look over here, and I've cut a few in the middle, it's actually the fourth shortest Shakespeare play of all, and is the shortest tragedy. If you compare it to something like Hamlet with over 30,000 words, that's what you could have won for your GCSE, you'll see it's remarkably short. And so of those words, if you look at the time, I've just picked a few of them. Time, hour, minutes, tomorrow, hereafter comes up quite a bit. And in those individual words, they don't look like too many, but actually that makes about 1% of all words in the play. Again, maybe 1% doesn't sound absolutely huge, but every 1 in 100 words is something to do with time. And beyond that, there are soliloquies and there are sentences that are also exploring this idea. It is a short play, but a lot happens. It just happens at a frightening pace. And I think we'll feel that at different points in the play, as I will come on to. The very first word of the play is time word. It is when. When shall we three meet again? And it's this obsession, I think, with the future, this idea of when. When is something going to happen? Whether it's knowable, whether we can have that future, can we get into it? Whether time is a force we can control or if time is a force working against us that drives much of the action, and I think especially Macbeth's motivations. We begin with an impression of time as something possibly malleable. The characters seem quick to move as quickly as possible into the future, which I'll come to shortly. The witches are projecting forward with their when, and that obsession of what is to come, getting away from the here and now, is integral to the crucial third, all hail, the third prophecy Macbeth hears. All hail Macbeth that shall be king hereafter. I'll come back to that word shortly. Even Banquo is drawn to the utterly compelling idea that we could know our own futures, not just Rebecca, remember. If you can look into the seeds of time, he asks the witches, almost as soon as he's met them. When offered the possibility of that knowledge, Shakespeare suggests, who wouldn't want to know? However, the problem for Macbeth is the vagueness of it. Yes, the opening word of the play is a time word, but it's also a question. One that played Macbeth. When? When can I have this thing? Because hereafter is quite a slippery word in itself. Sort of looking at different definitions for hereafter. It seems to carry three possible meanings. It could mean, and two of them look very, very similar, but I think it's something different. It could mean from now on, from this point forwards, shall be king hereafter. From this point forward, you will be king. That sounds quite promising. It could mean, annoyingly, at some time in the future, just a vague bit in the future. And I think that's the bit that Macbeth can't deal with. Interestingly, while I'm not going to explore it in loads of detail here, it also, the hereafter is this idea of death. So there's that possible other kind of ominous third meaning. That's actually the earliest meaning of it when you start tracing words back. This idea of hereafter being the afterlife. There is kind of buried in there as well, this kind of ominous thing about death. Perhaps. But the best question is, well, what's the time frame for this? Initially, he seems kind of happy to kind of let that time frame play its own course. He's fairly humble in facing this question, I think. And come what come may, time and hour runs through roughest day. Time will take its own course, he concludes. And so where does this idea of time speeding up come from? Well, it's Lady Macbeth who seems to introduce
this first. Just after on Saxony here speech, which you might remember actually, Professor Diane Perkins on Massive talked about her own kind of speaking up, perhaps as a kind of call for this like aging, early menopause. I'm not going to go down that route now, but it's interesting that she's also looking to kind of speed that up. And she cuts against this come what may that Macbeth gets settled on. And she feels this bizarre phrase, I feel now the future in the instance, the paradox, but this idea that I can have this thing immediately, it's happening right now, even though it is actually the future. But be careful what you wish for. Because it doesn't take long for characters to start feeling that time is slipping away from them, going a bit too quickly. They can barely keep up with time. For Macbeth in the early acts of the play, time is still just about on his side, but it's a fairly close run thing. This is a line I'd never given too much thought to before I started looking at this for this talk. But when Macduff arrives, he makes an astonishing admission. This is about the fifth thing he says in the whole play. Macduff says, "Is the king stirring where he fate? Macbeth, not yet. Macduff, he did command me call timely on him. He said, be here on time. I have almost slipped the hour. I've almost slipped the hour. It means I'm on the verge of being late already." Macduff walks in, and he has been in the wrong place, almost at the wrong time. Something kind of ominous about what happens to him in the future, I guess. But again, that's another talk in there. But let's think about the reality of this. If Macduff is a little bit more on time, he's there, let's say, 20 minutes earlier, what's he going to turn up during? Well, he's going to turn up with Macbeth covered in blood, having just stabbed the king. So Macbeth gets away with it, just about. Time is on his side, because someone else is apparently a little bit late. Macbeth can't rest easy in his current time, and you'll remember this, I'm sure, where he thinks forward all the time to his future. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, put a barren sceptre in my grip. He talks about this unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. He cannot rest in his happiness being king unless the future, not even him, his heir, somewhere in the future, he can imagine this continuation of power. Just enjoy being king, Macbeth, but no, he cannot. It's the future that plagues him. His solution? To challenge fate. That is the predestined future, to a battle in the list. I will take you on time, he says. And as we move into Act 4, we see him feeling that he's losing his battle against time, and he takes a new step to combat it. He has this astonishing soliloquy at the end of Act 14:1. He's just been told that Macduff has fled to England, and he addresses time directly. The time is a real, tangible thing, almost a person that is working against him. Time, thou anticipates my great exploits, he says. To paraphrase this, time, you seem to know or anticipate what I'm going to do. You prevent it. Time, you're working against me. He imagines it can read his thoughts, and the only way to avoid its interference is for the deed to go with it, things to be thought and done at the same time. So he's no longer going to think and then act. They're just going to happen immediately, because otherwise time gets ahead of him. He clearly sees time as a malign enemy force that he needs to defeat. Of course, that's not possible. And he will eventually come to understand that for all his power and strength, he is at the mercy of a much greater force in time. It's bigger than him, bigger than any of us. And as we move into Act 5, Shakespeare's choice of these 9 short scenes and this rapid entrance and exit, soldiers on and off all the time, gives a strong feeling of things speeding up. We're hurtling towards this inevitable conclusion, which we know is a tragedy. He's going to die. There's nothing stopping it, and if anything, it's picking up pace. Everything's packed in and happens almost too quickly for Macbeth. In his famous reflection on the news of his wife's death, he does begin with the word she, but that's about the only consideration he really gives to his wife's death, or to her at all. Because fundamentally, this book is not about Lady Macbeth. He talks about how we can, or perhaps arguably about her, but mostly this is about the forces of time and how insignificant we are in the face of it. I've highlighted here just the prevalence of a few time words, but actually the whole speech is about this thing. The whole speech is about the futility of individual existence, again, measured against the vastness of time. In the face of this, Macbeth veers into nihilism, the pointlessness of existence when faced with something so massive. I'm going to go back on that. Let's go back to this word hereafter again, because again it's famously ambiguous. There are 2 possible interpretations of this line. She should have died hereafter. So perhaps she should have died somewhere in the future, and we regret the fact she died now. Or perhaps she would have died eventually anyway, like we all do in time. I think given the rest of the speech and his relationship with time, whilst this is debated as being ambiguous, I come down firmly on the second one. We all die anyway, so what is the point? None of it matters because time is bigger than our little lives. And actually, interestingly, I think it's time that does get him in the end. The prophecy that no man or woman born shall harm Macbeth, it comes through on a kind of technicality, and again we can get into different things about what that means. But there are multiple ways of describing that, and Shakespeare chooses instead this word time again. Untimely writ, things happened at the wrong time, time went against you here. So where does that leave us? Are we at the mercy of time and its pointless insignificance? Do we join Macbeth in his nihilism? Well, no, because if time's about perspective, then perhaps we could regain a different perspective on it. We jump right to the final scene, and just again looking at prevalence of references to it. And okay, they have different meanings, but in these final few words, time comes up 4 times. Macduff promises the time is free, and Malcolm talks about not using this large expense of time. He's got stuff to get on with, things that can be planted newly with the time, and we will perform in measure, that is in the right way, at the right time and in the right place, things ordered. Succession to the throne should now not follow through early death, through murder. Everything must happen at the right time. But at the time they should. He will die naturally and his heir will take over. This is the order that he wants. Now, of course, that's a good political message for a new king, isn't it? Don't kill me, we need to be more orderly with time. And perhaps itself is an attempt to control our perspectives of time, so maybe he's at it as well. It is a force not to be meddled with, so don't accept the status quo. I think it's really interesting with the performance of Macbeth. Directors don't seem to like this. And it's telling how many performances feel the need to insert this strange circularity. They add in things, either as Fleance appears at the end, or very, very frequently, the witches come back on stage to repeat their opening unsettling time word of when. Because actually the answer is before the set of sun, which suggests it will happen soon by the end of the day, but also something on repetition. Because the sun sets every day, one falls, another rises. But that day, or that king, if we're to use this as a symbol for life, will too eventually pass. Because that's what time does. We have, since the first scene of the play, been at the mercy of time. Thank you very much.
So, I'm going to ask somebody to summarise their group's thoughts. Emily. Hello. Could you summarise your group's thoughts, please?
So we thought the most significant point was that time is just a perspective. Like, it seems to become more rushed towards the end of the day, when like in reality time obviously doesn't happen.
Okay, so like human interaction with time is that kind of key message from Macbeth, and then actually our perception of it is what's kind of more significant than the reality potentially. And a point of development?
We thought maybe like a counter argument, that rather than just like time is left as like, I don't know, the ever presented as like a good thing.
In Macbeth?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh, what do you think of this? Probably like Macbeth when he kills Jonathan, he kills Macbeth, or like they so it's probably better than Macbeth.
In the short term, I suppose, and maybe in the long term, you might have been better off if it didn't stop there and then. Maybe I can hand that over.
Yeah, I suppose it feels like, but when it does seem presented as a good thing, we can see in hindsight that it's not. That there's a kind of arrogance about their feeling. Like there's a feeling that they're in charge of time, everything's going their way. And I suppose over the whole play, I feel like it isn't presented as a force that's on their side. But then they're meant to be the bad guys, so maybe that's the lesson. But then Malcolm resets time at the end, I suppose. So maybe time can be reset. It's more about, as you say, our interaction with it.
And very quickly, Poppy, do you have anything to add? I wish I had a picture of your face. Yes, I'm asking you. Do you have anything to add, or any different perspectives from anything that we just discussed?
No, I definitely agree with that on this point.
What do you agree with specifically?
I thought the most significant was like the perception of time that Macbeth thinks of it.
And how does he think of it?
Well, at the start, he started to like kind of excited about like but towards the end, he was like he kind of situation
Yeah, designed by the yeah. Okay, thank you very much. All right, we are now going to welcome Liz Stacey to the stage. If you want to turn over your sheet, you've got similar questions, same questions there. Please welcome Mrs. Stacey talking about where help comes from. Macbeth is a tragedy of spiritual isolation.
Good afternoon, everyone. So by now you know that the Thane of Fife had a wife, but I would like to argue this afternoon that the Thane of Cawdor needed a counsellor. Now, I'm not suggesting that we psychoanalyse our tragic hero from a Freudian perspective. What I am suggesting is that Macbeth's spiritual isolation is a key factor in his tragic downfall and embodies the profound spiritual turmoil of the 17th century. To understand this more fully, we need a very quick history recap. So here we go, there's Henry VII. He was a Catholic. His son, Henry VIII, was a Catholic. Remember first, he was the defender of the faith, and then we had the Reformation, and he was a Protestant, established the Church of England. Edward VI was a Protestant, but then we had very quick Royal Days interlude from Lady Jane Grey. She was a Protestant. Mary I, some of you know who Bloody Mary came along, she was a Catholic. Elizabeth I was a Protestant. And then we hit James, who was a Protestant, under which Macbeth was written. So as you can see, it was written at a time of huge religious spiritual upheaval and lots of conflicts. And people were grappling with what it meant to have a faith. The Reformation under Henry and subsequent creation of the Church of England had significantly altered England's spiritual landscape. Centuries of Catholic tradition had been upended, and for decades the country had been in a bloody pendulum swing of Catholic-Protestant tumult. One recent interpretation of Romeo and Juliet, which you all remember from Year 8, suggests that this turbulence can be seen in the play's antagonistic two households, and we can quite possibly hear it in Macbeth too, in the hurly-burly and the battle that resound in the witches' opening lines. Related to this tumult came a profound theological shift. Under the Protestant Church of England, the practice of private confession to a priest was largely abandoned. In Catholic doctrine, confession was a vital mechanism for spiritual reconciliation or putting things right with God. To have a person acting as your confessor like this is still viewed by many people today as one of the earliest forms of counselling. Protestant reformers, however, rejected this sacrament of confession, and in Macbeth we can see a reflection of the spiritual isolation that this caused. Firstly, in Act 1, we see that our protagonist starts when witches announce their prophecy that he shall be king hereafter, which possibly indicates that he has already contemplated the thought of regicide. But to whom, apart from his equally ambitious wife, who we will come to shortly, has he been able to go to talk to about this sinful thought? In contrast to the close relationship that Romeo and Juliet had with Friar Lawrence, for example, Macbeth has no priest or external figure to guide him towards confession and absolution. He is instead left isolated in a moral dilemma. This isolation is made apparent in the fact that he immediately reveals his thoughts in an aside. There is no one here to whom he can confess his sinful thoughts. He can only say to himself that this supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. Even when a doctor enters the turmoil in Act 5 to try and help Lady Macbeth, he too highlights this absence of a priest or confessor. He notes that her heart is sorely charged, but that the disease is beyond my practice, and more needs she the divine than the physician. But no confessor comes, and Lady Macbeth too is left in spiritual isolation with internalized moral conflict, just like her husband. So it seems clear that Shakespeare is interested in what happens to a person with unconfessed moral failings. The whole play is littered with references to the general confession of the Book of Common Prayer, which Thomas Cranmer put together under Edward VI. That's one of the earliest versions of it. It goes back hundreds of years. It was first published in 1549, and my beautiful assistants are about to pass out 2 copies if you want to circulate and have a little look. These are copies that are still in use today. But it goes back to 1549. As a side note, which I think is so interesting, this book has been called one of the hidden ingredients of Shakespeare's plays, and one which profoundly shaped his views of both this world and the otherworldly. And finally, my favourite, one critic has said, "You don't understand English literature without the Book of Common Prayer, the Bible, and Shakespeare." So I wonder how much of the language of the play you can spot in this. This is from the Book of Common Prayer, coming around. This is the general confession. I'm going to give you a few seconds just to skim read that. Do you notice any words that you also recognise in the play? You can ask people to turn on it. I think that in light of this, we not only hear Macbeth being fully aware of his black and deep desires of his own heart, but also echoing throughout the play the words about those things which ought not to have been done, echo throughout it, like a bell of his guilty conscience ringing out. We could even say that the word done, Mr. Neal will like this, it appears 32 times in the text, is like this conscience ringing out again and again. When the hurly-burly's done, we hear it start. In the most famous openings, one of his most famous soliloquies, if it were done, when 'tis done, then 'twere well, it were done quickly. And then the phrase with things I have done. There are many more. Yet neither Macbeth nor Lady Macbeth decide to or are able to use such language to confess their moral crimes. And so we find Macbeth in particular trapped in a cycle of guilt that finds no resolution. But, Miss Stacey, I hear you cry, he said. What about his wife? They talked openly about all of this together. He did have someone to talk to. And you're telling me that didn't really help. And actually, yes, and I agree with you. They did talk together about the deed that was to be done, and then was done. But Lady Macbeth really didn't help him with his need to confess and be absolved. When Macbeth, moments after the regicide, edges towards the language of confession, saying, "This is a sorry sight," Lady Macbeth immediately shuts him down and can even be seen to mock his words as she retorts, "A foolish thought to say a sorry sight." Later on, in response to Macbeth's ongoing anxiety about what he has done, she cuts off the possibility of a confession with the bluntly dismissive line of, "What's done is done." The rest of the play deals with the consequences of such unconfessed sin. The Book of Common Prayer words of confession point to forgiveness and claim that a person can be spared and restored and be made godly and righteous. Without such confession, a person who has done the things which we ought not to have done is left in a state of no health. And that's exactly what we see. Neither Macbeth nor Lady Macbeth make confession for what they have done, and their spiritual and psychological health dramatically deteriorates. In Act 2, Macbeth laments the torment of his unconfessed sin when he asks, "Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand?" Next, we see him haunted by Banquo's ghost, which itself can symbolise unconfessed sins and Macbeth's growing spiritual and psychological fragmentation. Lacking a framework for penance, he then spirals into paranoia and tyranny, attempting to suppress his guilt through further violence rather than seeking redemption. It is but a few short steps from this to a Scotland that becomes a country both fragmented and diseased because of its spiritually unhealthy ruler. This lack of health can also be seen in Lady Macbeth's famous sleepwalking scene, where the toll of unconfessed guilt breaks through from her unconscious mind, revealing a spiritual and psychological torment that ultimately leads to her death. By the play's conclusion, Macbeth's alienation is complete. His famous soliloquy in Act 5, "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow," reveals a profound nihilism. He no longer seeks forgiveness or meaning, resigning himself to a bleak existence devoid of spiritual hope or faith or possibility of redemption. Macbeth's tragedy is his spiritual isolation, reflects the spiritual dislocation of post-Reformation England. His and Lady Macbeth's refusal to confess leaves them alienated from grace, consumed by guilt, and ultimately destroyed. Shakespeare reminds us of the need for reconciliation, be it with God or oneself. If only they had access to a good confessor or counsellor.
Go. Okay. Today we propose that Lady Macbeth
Macbeth's relentless manipulation and emasculation of Macbeth are the primary catalyst for his tragic downfall. Her disregard for his moral compass and her insistence on his compliance with her own plans ultimately leads to his mental deterioration and downfall. I will be talking particularly about how Lady Macbeth's manipulation and attacks on Macbeth's masculinity, for her own benefit, are critical in convincing him to murder Duncan and set his moral decline and ultimate downfall into motion. So, we generally tend to focus on Macbeth's hamartia, his vaulting ambition, but many people fail to recognise that this flaw is the same for Lady Macbeth. She just lives through her husband and she does not have any power herself. The first signs of this is when, immediately after reading the letter Macbeth sends her, she proceeds to lament about his weak-minded nature and inability to catch the nearest wave. Despite the affectionate way in which Macbeth refers to her, you can't deny that Lady Macbeth massively juxtaposes this by talking of how she wishes to pour her spirits in his ear and implies that she must be the illness to cause him to act upon his intent. And she doesn't mind doing this to his face either. Immediately upon his entrance, Lady Macbeth addresses him by his titles, a big contrast to dearest partner in greatness, and ignores Macbeth's obvious unease when she discusses murdering Duncan, telling him to look like the innocent flower would be the serpent under it. She further manipulates Macbeth by attacking his masculinity, not only calling Macbeth a coward for his unwillingness to murder Duncan, but proclaiming, when you durst do it, then you are a man, making it blatantly obvious that she believes Macbeth was only a man when he was willing to murder to become king. She's also completely aware that a large amount of Macbeth's worth and titles are tied to bravery and masculinity, as displayed when the Captain Duncan named him Valor's minion and valiant cousin for murdering Macdonald in the first battle. She decides to use this to manipulate him, pressing him to act aggressively and decisively in order to prove himself. If you still don't believe Lady Macbeth manipulating Macbeth's decisions, look at how at the start of Act 1, Scene 7, Macbeth has completely decided he will not kill Duncan, and after one single conversation with Lady Macbeth, he proclaims, "I am settled." He then proceeds to eerily echo Lady
Point of
Macbeth's words.
information. Accepted. Macbeth hasn't completely decided. He's kind of on the border of whether he wants to do it or not.
I'd say that he wouldn't have done it if Lady Macbeth hadn't interrupted. I think it's especially shocking when he says made up his mind, and Lady Macbeth just enters when he says that he won't kill Duncan. Can I continue? Of course. 5 seconds. Oh, okay. That she has managed to manipulate him into thinking the same way as her and ultimately managing to manipulate him into committing regicide. Thank you.
Following on from this excellent point from Emma, throughout the play, Shakespeare clearly shows Lady Macbeth not allowing Macbeth to have an outlet for his inner ongoing trauma. She tells him to consider it not so deeply, when, after the assassination of Duncan, Macbeth slips into an emotional turmoil. Lady Macbeth leaves him to attempt to try and deal with his many conflicting emotions alone. There are countless examples of Lady Macbeth denying him the ability to confide in her, and providing no support or comfort to Macbeth's mental pain. Like before the feast, she tells him to leave this when discussing their previous deicide, which may lead to when, at the banquet, Macbeth hallucinates Banquo's ghost. Here she exclaims, "Oh, proper stuff," showing that she perceives the hallucinations as nothing but nonsense. In this moment, when her husband needs her help and advice, support and reassurance, Lady Macbeth only scorns him, providing none of the things he needs. Then Macbeth, driven by the verbal abuse and lack of counsel that he is receiving from his wife, returns to the witches, this time hoping for reassurance that regicide is the correct thing to do. Following this encounter, Macbeth becomes increasingly hubristic and myopic. This overconfidence leads to Macbeth becoming a tyrant, as for the rest of the play, the very firstlings of his heart shall be the very firstlings of his hand. This progressively turns people against him, causing the army and support of Malcolm Macduff to grow and grow, until they overpower him. In Macbeth's death, it is blatantly obvious to us as the audience that all of this stemmed from the selfishness of Lady Macbeth not providing the support and counsel for Macbeth she should as his dearest partner of greatness. Thank you for listening.
Thank you to the proposition for their well thought out argument on why Lady Macbeth is the most to blame for Macbeth's downfall. However, our team, with myself, Sophia, Mercy, Ailish and Freya, are here to counter that. We ask you and the audience to take a second, look at the motion and focus on most to blame and downfall. We aren't here to pretend Lady Macbeth isn't partly to blame. However, our side feels she isn't the most responsible because she herself is a victim of society and is driven to be a perfect political wife. Ailish will explore the role of the witches in his downfall, and Mercy will cover Macbeth himself as a violent character, as proved at the start, which grows throughout. To start us off, myself and Sophia will discuss how Lady Macbeth and Macbeth have a complicit relationship in Macbeth's downfall, and how Lady Macbeth isn't solely to blame for his descent. Although you may argue Lady Macbeth urges Macbeth to act on his ambitious desires, driving him to murder Duncan, it is clear once the play progresses that Macbeth's ambition and moral deterioration are his own fault. We also see later in the play that Lady Macbeth has guilt overwhelming her when she says, "Out damn Spot," while Macbeth, on the other hand, is increasingly taking control of his own fate, committing further murders without consulting her, making him fully responsible for those actions. I will now hand on to Sophia to continue our argument.
Thank you very much.
So, Lady Macbeth is presented as a complex character who is not most to blame for Macbeth's downfall. The motion allows me to acknowledge that she's partly complicit. However, I'll be exploring how Lady Macbeth is a victim of society's misogynistic expectations of women during the Jacobean era, and how this influences her actions towards Macbeth. So, at the start of the play, the Macbeths are presented as an extremely competent couple, portrayed as a sort of unit. While plotting Duncan's murder, Macbeth asks what will happen if we should fail, and Lady Macbeth replies that we fail. The repetition of "we" emphasises how Macbeths are prepared to be seen as literal partners in crime, revealing the extent of their trust and reliability on each other. However, as the play progresses and more murders happen, it's evident that Lady Macbeth was solely focused on the regicide and nothing else to do with Macbeth's pursuit of power. There are many references in the play implying that Lady Macbeth once had a child. For example, she says she gave suck to a child, which means she nursed it. It could be argued that Lady Macbeth feels the need to overcompensate for her lack of heir. Lady Macbeth would feel the overwhelming guilt that her role to give her husband an heir is something that she cannot fulfill. So as a result, she tries to gain validation by helping him to gain the throne. For context, there were many wives in history, like Margaret of Anjou and Margaret of Beaufort, who similarly helped their husbands in regicide so that their husbands could become king. So it's proven that it was not uncommon for women to aid their husbands in killing the king. So therefore, this is why Lady Macbeth is not most to blame for her husband's downfall, as she had no choice but to comply with another way to compensate for being a victim of society. Thank you.
Hello? Oh, okay. Lady Macbeth is the most to blame for Macbeth's downfall. That's still a definite. And I will continue our case in a minute, but before there are some things, we have a question about the opposition's speech that needs to be addressed. Does Lady Macbeth's ultimate isolation and psychological breakdown mean that we can disconclude her from Macbeth's downfall? Additionally, the preposition has chosen Act 3, Scene 4, or more known as the banquet scene, to reinstate our argument. In this scene, you may remember that Macbeth sees the ghost Banquo haunt him as he sits in Macbeth's seat and shakes his head at him with disapproval. This sends him into a frenzy, which disturbs the guests and ultimately raises their suspicions of the protagonist for murdering Duncan and being a traitor of Scotland. Here, our impressions of Lady Macbeth as manipulative and controlling are only exemplified. As we remember from before, her previous push sent Macbeth into committing regicide before becoming eternally damned and angering God. In this scene, Lady Macbeth chooses to immediately oppress and emasculate vulnerable Macbeth under her demands, instead of protecting some of his reputation by sending the guests out at once. Lady Macbeth's harsh rebuke of "Are you a man?" to Macbeth not only reminds us of her past emasculating comments, but also reveals her expectation for Macbeth to fulfill the stereotypical role of an emotionless and forever composed man. We all feel emotion, woman, man, cat or dog, and are taught from a young age to express our feelings, especially the ones that bother us. Otherwise, they will only get worse. So imagine Macbeth's situation, his own wife, his only family, in the play, continually oppressing him into an impossible stereotype and forcing him to suppress his emotions as well as dismissing them herself. This can only lead to his emotional and psychological deterioration. And as an audience, we can see his fragile and poisoned mind, especially from his previous quote, "My mind is full of scorpions." Therefore, this is of Lady Macbeth's oppression, particularly in his vulnerable state, is bound to push Macbeth over the edge and into his downfall. Therefore, the proposition believes that Macbeth's ignorance of Macbeth's state and her continuous oppression of his feelings from an impactful position.
Wait, so you're talking about how her downfall was because of Macbeth, but her downfall was kind of after all of Macbeth's kind of initial, like, his most detrimental actions. So it's more like we can interpret it as.
I say that his downfall was because of Macbeth? Wait, you talking about the point you started with, I think, because spiritual downfall is in isolation at the end.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
We can phrase that.
Yeah.
Can we wrap up? So Lady Macbeth is the most to blame for Macbeth's downfall. Thank you.
Yeah. We ready? Okay.
The proposition has chosen Act 5, Scene 5, when Lady Macbeth dies, to reinstate the fact that Lady Macbeth is the most to blame. There are several ways that Lady Macbeth contributed to Macbeth's downfall. One way that she did this was by making Macbeth so dependent on her, by assuming a parenting role and controlling everything. She did not let him have a choice about anything, from deciding the plan of Duncan's murder to dismissing the Thanes from Macbeth's banquet. Another example of this is in Act 3, Scene 2, when Lady Macbeth tells him to be bright and jovial among your guests tonight. She tries to control his behaviour and how he looks to other people. This meant that when she died in Act 5, Scene 5, Macbeth could not cope. The grief of losing his dearest partner in greatness leads him to say that life's but a walking shadow. He has no use for life anymore. It has lost all meaning. Unfortunately, at this point in the play, Macbeth is incapable of making decisions about anything. This is because earlier in the play, Lady Macbeth took responsibility for all of his actions. She makes regicide seem like committing an everyday activity, saying, "Consider it not so deeply," implying that Macbeth was worrying unnecessarily. Macbeth becomes so dependent on her that when she dies, there is no one he can turn to. No Thanes trust him.
Point of information. But isn't that saying that, like, Macbeth, when he makes his own choices, he's making bad choices?
Wait, so what do you mean by
Getting his own way to from the banquet.
Yeah. Because Lady Macbeth has nothing to do with the banquet, and that's making bad choices.
But she's kind of saying, she's like kind of dismissing the Thanes from him. She kind of controls him and makes sure he doesn't really have any decisions.
Then surely there'd like worse stuff that happened if Lady Macbeth didn't control him because he'd just go a bit like crazy.
But that's the right
state.
She let him go like absolutely crazy near the end, and then only took him out.
She really should got rid of them earlier though, before she kind of tried to control. She tried to control it. She tried to say no, Macbeth's fine. But when he really was fine,
She tried to tell him to act fine as well until he actually just couldn't do it anymore, and they just sent everyone out.
Well, someone had to keep it all together, otherwise it would have gone like Macbeth would have gone killing everyone.
So she does keep it all together.
That's when the saying starts, not trusting me.
Continue, please.
His servants fear him. There is no one else who supports him. Because he relied so much on his wife, he isn't really capable of making his own mind up. At this point, we need to turn back to the play and look what happens in the battle. His judgment is impaired because he is beginning to be wary of the sun. He is tired in life, and this is mostly due to Lady Macbeth's death. He recklessly cuts his way across the battlefield until at last his heedless fighting is brought up short. He is met by Macduff, who kills him and ends his lady life. This shows that Lady Macbeth is clearly the most to blame for Macbeth's downfall.
I first want to talk about the proposition's choice to use scene Act 5 at scene 5 to attempt to prove Lady Macbeth's guilt. Because Lady Macbeth herself doesn't make an appearance in this scene. Her only appearance in Act 5 is scene 1, where she is unconscious. In that scene, it's only that her death is exposed to the audience. And where she doesn't get the opportunity to finish her own story. Instead, as a woman, her story is finished by a man's voice. She doesn't get to show the audience how she feels in her body.
Please continue.
And Macbeth himself doesn't appear to be upset over Lady Macbeth's death, instead focusing on how that will impact him as a ruler, which links into Sophia's earlier points. To further prove our point, Shakespeare uses the tragic form to free Lady Macbeth of blame by connecting Macbeth's true moment of anagnosis. When you have to wait for him to accept. Sure, go ahead.
I just want to link back to what you said earlier, and I think you said that she had cut, like her story was cut short. I just want to say that she cut her own story short.
That's supported by Malcolm, and it's considered a theory by the characters in the play. It's never explicitly stated. The only person who could prove that as fact would be Lady Macbeth herself, but she does not get the opportunity to do so.
Isn't there a woman's cry that kind of signifies that? Like she's still
That doesn't automatically show that it was a suicide. It could have been someone attacking her, or
Yeah,
could have
it
been.
could have even been Macbeth herself.
Oh, no.
Okay, carry on, please. Off we go.
Throughout the play, Macbeth bases his movements around the witch's prophetic statements. Harking back to Macbeth's first encounter with the witches, Banquo observes him as being enwrapped with awe, and later, when Macbeth proclaims he pulls a resolution, meaning he begins to lose faith in these prophecies and subsequently his own actions, Lady Macbeth is already dead. She isn't aware of her husband's actions, as she confesses in Act 5, Scene 1, while asleep, her last appearance on stage, wondering where Lady Macduff is. But as the audience, we have a dramatic irony that shows us that murder is the basis that Shakespeare uses to show Macduff as the true hero of the play, by giving him a sympathetic motive that was entirely caused by Macbeth.
Point of information. How does this
Hold
relate?
on. Right. Do you accept?
Yeah.
How does this relate to the topic?
Because I'm explaining how the witch's influence on Macbeth that caused him to commit the murders, that Shakespeare then uses the tragic form to prove Macbeth is guilty.
Point of information. About the witness.
Despite this, the second and third prophetic equivocation causes him to shed his fears, instead revealing he has no need to fear of Macbeth. Later on, just before the wood approaches Dunsinane, he reveals he has almost forgot the taste of fears, showing his prophecies remain strong until, of course, the woods begin to move. The witch has lured Macbeth into a trap, but his own blind-sided ambition allowed for his fall.
Thank you.
Okay. Follow on from this point, as well as the supernatural influence in Macbeth's downfall, Macbeth himself is arguably more responsible than Lady Macbeth for his own downfall. Before Lady Macbeth even appears on stage, Macbeth's reaction to the witches immediately reveals that they must have tapped into some formerly existing, deep-rooted ambition in Macbeth. He uses an aside to reveal his innermost thoughts to the audience, proclaiming Glamis and Thane of Cawdor, the greatest is behind. In another aside shortly after, Macbeth acknowledges that the Prince of Cumberland is a step on which he must fall down, or else overleap. These asides show how deeply Macbeth is already hooked onto the idea of holding power, without any influence from Lady Macbeth. As the opposition, we believe that Macbeth's downfall was not solely caused by his regicide, but also developed by the further actions that followed this. Macbeth's desire to feed his violent ambition eventually lead to him killing many more people throughout the play, like Banquo and Macduff's family, which eventually lead to his death and therefore his downfall. My final point leads on from Ailish's about the structure of Shakespeare's tragedies.
Ultimately, he was sort of settled that he wasn't going to commit the murder until Lady Macbeth stepped in there. Every other action that led after Duncan's murder was sort of happened because of Lady Macbeth's manipulation.
First of all, I don't think it was settled. I don't think he was settled. He definitely still seems in his mind.
He says, I quote, I am settled.
He definitely wasn't going to do it. And also, arguably, if he hadn't done the other actions after that, people wouldn't have suspected him.
We've seen him lie on stage before. He lied to Banquo multiple times. There's no proof he wasn't like that.
Saying that he was lying to someone else, but would he lie to himself?
Yeah. We need to carry on. You ready? Macbeth is a tragic hero, and so he has to begin as someone who is admired by the audience. Just because Lady Macbeth is used as the character who pushes Macbeth towards his downfall, does not mean that she is most to blame, as Macbeth himself, as well as other causes, arguably caused his own downfall. Thank you.
Ready when you are. Off you go.
The opposition has completely undermined their argument by saying Lady Macbeth is to blame in conclusion, it is obviously undeniable that Lady Macbeth is the most to blame for Macbeth's downfall. Through her apparent vindictive manipulation and invalidation of his fears throughout the play, she refuses to provide him counsel and she targets him, driving him to the witches, leading to his hubris. Ultimately, he was, quote, settled against the regicide, and Lady Macbeth persuades him to it for this awful crime, damning his soul for eternity, leading to all the consequences of his further actions. Lady Macbeth then leaves Macbeth in the mess that she created after making him depend on her, leaving him vulnerable and completely alone in his time of greatest need. For all these reasons, this motion must stand.
First of all, the motion is that Lady Macbeth is most to blame for Macbeth's downfall. So we have agreed that she is slightly to blame, but that does not by any means mean that she is most to blame. There's also much of your debate has been about the speech in Act 1, Scene 7. Macbeth opens with, if it were done when it were done, then well it were done quickly. He is only thinking about the consequences of killing Duncan, and therefore it's very unfair to say that Lady Macbeth convinces him. Also, on the banquet scene, I think Lady Macbeth was completely unaware of the fact that Macbeth killed Banquo. For you to say that she completely controlled him in that scene is just untrue, because how can she control him when she doesn't have the info? Also, the witches, the start of the whole play, and they completely started Macbeth's kind of downfall because they led to him eventually. Like, he was immediately hooked and they led to him.
Thank you both very, very much. Two compelling arguments there. Could you just discuss amongst yourselves which side of the argument you found most compelling? So thanks.
I have a question. Are we voting for which point was more convincing or which point we agree with, like, more naturally?
I think that's a really good question, and it's actually something you're going to pick up with your teachers in your next lesson. That is the end of our Macbeth Symposium. Thank you everybody for